All right, thank you very much. So this morning we'll be looking at contemporary challenges in research ethics and capacity building. And to take us on that is the lecturer that gave us insight last week, which you all give applause to. So she will continue in that line in exposing us to contemporary challenges and how to handle them, as well as how to build our capacity in research ethics. Over the next 1 hour, we'll be doing that. Dr. Ubitiri, over to you. We can see you change your slide, but we can't hear your voice if you are speaking. We seem to be having a lot of technical issues this morning. Dr. Peteri, can you hear me?
You hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay, all right. Good.
We can
All right,
see your slide, but it's not on slideshow.
okay, let me just move that too.
Okay.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you and you can see your slides.
Okay, good. Okay. So good morning, everybody. Good morning, Prof. Dr. Lawal, thank you once again for this opportunity to contribute to the discussion and the training on research ethics. So this morning we'll be looking at contemporary challenges in research ethics, and then we'll also be looking at capacity building also in research ethics. So we'll walk through using this outline. As we all understand, a lot of evolution is taking place, just as human evolved. You know, the evolution theory will tell you that we evolved from monkey. So there were a lot of changes, complexities arose over time, and we had the modern man, as it were. And that's why I depicted that. And just as you had for humans, also, we also have, we've had a lot of changes across the landscape of research ethics. Of course, we had changes across the various regulations. At some point, some regulations were found to be, oh, it's fine at this moment, but with certain other issues that arose, there was a need to change. And we understand that there's something that is constant, and that thing that is constant in this world is change. And it also occurs across research ethics. So we've moved from Nuremberg Code of 1947. We're now talking about AI-driven research. And of course, people are beginning to say we should have regulations, we should have guidelines that guides people when they are conducting such research. Of course, we already have such guidelines. But however, in our times, I guess we are not yet up to date with that. Of course, there's been a lot of expansion. It's just been before now when you talk about research, more people will usually talk about the biomedical. But of course, we are beginning to see that we also have community-based participatory research. Social science researches are also increasing. And of course, there's also an increasing need to actually cater for the ethical issues across such research. But however, the principles, the core principles of research ethics have not changed. The principle of autonomy, beneficence, but we are beginning to look at it. Yes, we know that these principles exist, but can we begin to modify them in line with the current complexities that have arisen in the research frontier? We're also talking about globalization of research. So research is not just one research conducted in one institution. We're going to have research involving multinationals, research involving several countries. You have multi-diverse teams with different diverse values and culture, and all this needs to be captured in such research. And that's why, we talk about the evolving changes in research ethics. We're also looking at ethics pluralism. So we're looking at what we classify as morals in one setting might be different in another setting. And all this, we need to gather them together when we take decisions regarding how ethical research is. So we can say research is ethical in this line based on what exists. But by the time you go to another place, the values are different. So you also need to examine them in the light of what exists in their setting. So we'll talk about issues about pluralism in ethics. And these are all the complexities that have befallen us in the context of research in this time. So we'll look at the traditional and contemporary research. The traditional research is what many of us are quite useful. That's the research that you have just one single site study. I'm a researcher in a particular institution. I'm conducting a study just in my institution. But we see that in current times, research has gone past that. Now we have several international collaborative research. We have research involving several countries. You can have like 8, 10 countries all undergoing one particular research. You have sites in various countries, and we also need to change with this current reality. Now, the kind of research we are used to, the traditional research, you have there's a clear boundary for participants. In such research, I am the researcher, you are the participant. You don't cross my boundary. You stay there as the participant. I stay there as the researcher, researching about you, and you give me information that I need to research about you. But we understand that in current time, this has actually changed. Now you can actually have the participants are now part of the research process from the start to the finish. So it's not where you are bringing them in between the research. I've designed my protocol. I've designed how I want to conduct this research. Then I call you in to give me information. No, that's not the way it is now. Now the participants are being carried along right from the drafting of the protocol of that research. So you see, a lot of things have changed. Before now, we used to have physical samples. But of course, it's no longer that way. We also have genomic data and information. We have digital data also about individuals. So we need to make provisos in our guidelines to address this current complexity in our research process. The same thing with informed consent process. Informed consent used to be a one-way thing before, I just get a consent from you. Yes, you are the participants and all of that. But we are beginning to say we need to modify the context. We need to modify our consent process in line with the peculiarities of different settings. So what applies to be a valid consent in Africa might not be valid in the North. What applies to be a valid consent, for example, there's a common example we all use. Of course, as an individual, at a particular age, you should be able to give consent. But for us, there are times where, as a woman, aside your consent, you also need the consent of your husband. You see, these are various changes that people are beginning to look at in line with the current dimensions and current changes in the research frontier. So we need to capture all of these in our guideline and capture all of this in our research process. And of course, there are also some, in the traditional form of research, you have research that the risk is known. But there are also emerging issues that are arising that sometimes you're conducting research and there are emerging risks. So how do you address such risk? When you started the research, you did a risk-benefit analysis and you said, oh, this is a risk. But along the line, because of conducting this, so you discover that what? The additional risks that are coming up, for example, in digital research, there are issues about privacy, open access, access to the data. Who has the access to the data? How do we ensure that actually we ensure protection of the data that these participants are given? Something that is online there in the social media, or something that is online there in the cloud space. How effectively can you actually protect those data that are out there? So these are issues that are arising in terms of contemporary research. Now, I just decided to lay a kind of a background for this discussion. We see that the landscape of biomedical research is actually undergoing changes. And that's why we have to move in the wave. We have to move with the change. We cannot continue to think the way the way in the line of the traditional research, where it's just been, most of us are quite used to that, but we have to evolve from the traditional to see some of the issues that arise in the complex and in the contemporary setting and see how we can align to that. We are talking about big data currently. We are talking about AI. Now we're talking about globalized research now, not just globalized research, globalized genomics. So we are seeing that data across involving participants are now being spread, not just within their clients where they are, but it's crossing borders. How do we ensure the protection of such data? Now, issue about public trust is coming into place. Yes, the research is a scientific process, but also we must be able to gain public trust in research. Anything that alters this trust, then there's a problem. Anything that alters the trust that the public have on our research process, it becomes a particular issue. And that is why we must evolve. We must evolve in our processes, our research processes. We must evolve even in our capacity. And that's why we're looking at capacity building today. So we must build capacity in line with the current evolution that is taking place in research. So it's an urgency, as that's the way I see it. That's the issue about the contemporary research and aligning to the ethical changes and the ethical provisos for those kind of research. It's an urgency. Why is there an urgency? Because there's a lot of public skepticism. Yes, we understand. We love the innovations that are taking place, but the public is also scared. Yes, we love the innovation, but how are we sure that we are protected? And that's where the various players in research come to play. The players in terms of the researchers, the players in terms of the funders of the research, the players in terms of the ethics committees have a role to play in this. And we're also beginning to find out that there are a lot of high-profile ethical failures in research. Now we are having multi-site studies, multinational studies, but we are beginning to look at it. I was in a meeting, I wouldn't want to mention, probably a few persons probably attended the same. And in a particular country, there was a particular clinical trial for a vaccine that was going to take place in the country. And a lot of issues arose from that meeting. How did they get the approval of the regulatory bodies and all of that? So what we found was a situation where you just had a protocol dumped from a particular institution from the north. Approval was gotten from them, but without giving cognizance, without giving interest to also the opinion of those from where the research participants will be drawn. These are issues that are rising. Why is it that? Of course, because if research is no longer research done just in one country, countries are beginning to get involved. You have different countries doing research, so you have to respect. That's what we come with ethical pluralism. We need to respect the values. We need to respect the regulations. We need to respect the guidelines that are in place in those countries as much as we want to ensure that we conduct such studies. And of course, because ethics is an enabler, ethics is not an obstacle. Many researchers, when you tell them, oh, you need to get an ethical approval for your work, oh, we need to look at the ethics of your work, a lot of people they don't feel very comfortable with it. Or they feel, oh, you want to stop ethics. Ethics is not policing. It's about ensuring that the safety and the rights of participants are protected in the course of your research. Now we're going to look at specific, ethical challenges across specific disciplines in contemporary times. So I'll just start with the biomedical. Of course, the biomedical research, which many of us probably are involved in. So the major risks in such studies you're looking at, of course, we are quite aware of the physical harms, depending on the kind of studies that you might be conducting. Some of them might be psychological, but majorly physical. Of course, the consent model is what we are all very familiar with. So it's very explicit. You have it documented. For social science, you're scared of issues about psychological harm, group harm for a group of persons. We're also looking at structural vulnerability. Structural vulnerability speaks of such vulnerability that arise as a result of probably the social group. It could be the person's legal status. For example, some immigrants in some countries who are not documented, they don't have papers. At that point, those people become vulnerable. So we need to begin to, why? Because people are moving. So I might be in Nigeria, but I'm moving, I'm going to the UK, I'm going to Canada and all of that. So we need to also consider research in such populations also. This creates some form of vulnerability, and we need to understand that. Also, an issue of AI research, computational research. We have issues about algorithm bias. Oh yes, AI generates the algorithms, but could it be that it is actually generating it in line with bias with a particular set of people? How are you able to ensure that? What are the ethical caveats that we have in place to ensure that participants involved in such research are protected? Of course, digital research also have issues around the vulnerability. These participants, what is their digital literacy? If you're going to conduct a digital research and the participants, have, will I say, reduced digital literacy, of course, at that point, they become vulnerable. But we are beginning to ask, how do we ensure that we have the necessary drivers to ensure that participants involved in such research are protected? What are the additional safeguards that we need to put in place to ensure that participants who are involved in such research are protected? And we have the community-based, the participatory research. The community-based participatory research, in such research, we are worried about exploitation of community members. Of course, we understand that there are several times where you probably come to a community, especially when the community sees, oh, you have some white guys with some black guys who are researchers wanting to conduct research in their community. You might find that subtle threats. Oh, these people, they appear to be more than us and all of that. At some point, probably because of the situation of the community where they are located, they see themselves, that's some form of vulnerability. But we want to look at how do we protect these participants to know that they are right and that they have a right, that they have a say in the research, and they have a say to contribute to the research process from start to finish. So there's that fear of exploitation. And of course, it's beginning to happen because, of course, we are beginning to have a lot of communicative-based research. But we are, what are we, so for such research, we are beginning to say, no, the community members, the community participants also should have a say in the research. They are not just objects of research, but they should be part of the research process. So we have a lot of imbalance. Of course, vulnerability occur where you have power imbalance between the researcher and the researched. There are other challenges with biomedical research in contemporary times. We have the issue of therapeutic misconception. So sometimes we are conducting research, and that happens a lot in research in the clinical setting. So sometimes you're conducting research on the patient. The patient thinks that that's obviously that's my treatment. And you don't make it clear enough to the patient to know that although you are a patient, but you actually been enrolled in a research, this is not part of the treatment process. It's not just about treatment, but you are part of a research. But we see that many researchers intentionally do not give this information to the participants. And of course, you know that one of the things that makes a research process ethical is that there must be an informed consent. So anything that obscures this process of providing adequate information to participants to make an informed decision, then that becomes unethical. So these are issues that is beginning to arise. Yes, we have issue about regulatory compliance versus ethical excellence. Now, there are issues also that we have a lot of regulations. I want to speak to this, especially with multinational research. You have regulations across various countries, but then we need to create a balance. There are regulations, probably you have like 6, 10 countries involved in one research. But we must have a balance where we are addressing specific items from each country's regulation. So you have the general regulation. You have a regulation for Nigeria, research in Nigeria, you have in the US, UK, and all of that. But there are some that you have a particular regulation cuts across board. So we take that into consideration and apply for all, and also apply the specific for each country. So these are issues that are right. It's unlike before where you just have, probably you're just conducting a study in just in one country. You're conducting a study in just Nigeria, maybe in Gambia. Of course, this is not an issue because, of course, the Nigerian people will apply. But when you have several countries, it becomes very difficult applying several regulations. So these are issues. Also, issues around vulnerable participants, the special populations. We must have safeguards for them. Issues that are now coming with respect to emancipated adolescents. Yes, they are adolescents in research, but they are emancipated. They might be children, but of course, they have what it takes to be adults. So people are beginning to say, of course, they should be able to take consent from them. So these are a lot of complexities that are beginning to arise in contemporary research. And we must also align ourselves in this direction. There are other issues about dynamic and broad consent. And that's, it plays more when you talk about biobanking governance. So we are going to talk about broad consent. Of course, there's something called blanket consent, but as much as possible, we want to, say little about it, because blanket consent, although it might not be unethical in all its sense, but in certain situations, we really would not, we do not promote blanket consent. So broad consent, yes, in biobank where you have to keep blood for over a long period of time, you might want to obtain a broad consent where the participant tells you, oh yes, you can actually use, even though you're conducting this study, but from the samples from this study, you can use for other future studies, but with a proviso that an ethics committee have reviewed. In the case of blanket, that proviso is not there. You can use my samples for anything you want to do anytime. But then the ethics committee comes as the protector. That's the way I see it. So protect these samples for the participants, because at the time you are coming in the future, as the consent has been given, you might not be able to contact that participant, but the ethics committee stands as the protector to ensure that the particular sample is used for what it said it will be used for, and that the participants are not exploited in any form. So these are a bit of the challenges that we face with biomedical research. There are also issues, because it's very important that we talk about this. The oversight capacity. Remember that for the ethics, every time you get, I would say when you get an ethical approval from an organized, a well-constituted ethics committee, the ethics committee has an oversight over that research. But we discover that it's becoming challenging to conduct such oversights. Even for those studies that are conducted just within a country, it's already a challenge. Now, I ask many times we give approval, how many ethics committees are able to conduct post-approval monitoring? Very few. And why? Because we have resource limitation. Many of our ethics committees are not well funded. We do not even have SOPs for that. It's not captured in the structure and the process for the ethics committees. Another challenge also with respect to oversight capacity is that because of the complexities of this research, as we're going to come to see, for example, we are going to have things like adaptive trials, where you have various platforms just in one trial. Now, many of the where you have expertise gap, it becomes an issue. I can't really perform functional oversight over an area I have little knowledge about. And that's what we also currently experience. So we have some committees, where you don't have enough expertise. So whatever comes, you say, oh, it goes. They bring the protocols and it's just an express approval. So we need to also build capacity. And you see the second part of this presentation about capacities in research ethics. I already talked about the issue of harmonizing. I also need to harmonize the needs for international research. Harmonize the needs in terms of guidelines. Harmonize the needs in terms of what each national needs. Another issue that is affecting the oversight of our regulation, particularly the ethics committee, is review fatigue. Review fatigue. You have so many protocols to review with very few persons. So over time, when you discover that, oh, it becomes too much, then you have people, the tendency to cut corners begins to come in. So that's also an issue. And we're going to see how we're able to build that into our institutional structure as we move ahead. Of course, for the social science research, social science research, that's also an evolving landscape in research. So it's not just about biomedical research anymore. We're going to have social science research. Now we begin to look at issues in terms of the qualitative and quantitative research. For qualitative research, how do we ensure privacy? How do we maintain privacy across these research approaches? We're also looking at how do I detach myself as a researcher? Rather than talk about the positionality and researcher reflexivity. How do I detach myself from the research? As a researcher, I have an idea. This is my bias. How do I detach myself, my bias, from the process of the research? We're going to look at issues about algorithm bias, as I talked about, for computational research, your AI research. How are we sure? What are the provisions? What are the safeguards that are in place to maintain or to monitor, to see that, oh, what the AI is actually giving us, it's something that is fair and not just a form of bias towards any particular country, bias towards any gender or any part of the research. So these are issues that are rising. And this is also arising because of the complexity of the kind of research that we see today. And also we are looking at issues on reproducibility, data integrity, how we're able to reproduce, to ensure reproducibility of the results that we find from your research. How do we ensure integrity of the data that we get from a particular research? Also having challenges in clinical trials. I already talked about the adaptive design. So you have a particular clinical trial with various platforms, add-on. I currently work as a sponsor rep for one of the trials, and it's an adaptive trials. So we have a particular arm, but yes, we also have other add-on arms where we can actually get to try some other drugs still on the same platform. You see, this is a complex process. It's not the straight cut randomized control trials that many of us are used to. That's the traditional form, as I will put it. But now it's not just that randomized. We're beginning to have several add-on on one same trial. You see, the complexity about the ethical review arises. Complexity also about how to ensure, how do you oversight where you have various countries involved in such trials. It becomes an issue. Now we also have the current issue of decentralized clinical trials. So it's not just about conducting clinical trial in an institution. Now we can actually conduct clinical trial in a community. It's almost like what you have with mobile clinics. So you can move the trial space from a physical, you can move the trial space from physical to virtual. I can move from an institution to a community. So we are going to have issues about decentralized clinical trials. Also, this requires additional guidelines. This requires also certain ethical caveats need to be put in place for such trials. And these are the current issues that are arising in our contemporary time. We also have standard of care conflicts. So issues about what exactly is the standard of care? How do we ensure that the standard of care is such that will give us, that will answer the research question that we want to get from a particular study? This basically applies to clinical trials. We also have challenges in the assessment of vulnerability. You agree with me? An individual can be vulnerable at different times and different positions depending on the situation. So if I create just one size fits it all to assess vulnerability, it becomes an issue because someone who is vulnerable at a particular point might not be vulnerable at another point. So these are issues that also have arisen with time in line with the current research in our time today. We are looking at justice in the selection of participants, justice in benefit sharing. These are issues arising. We also have certain issues with respect to post-trial responsibilities. We discovered a lot of clinical trials are taking place. That was yesterday. We looked at many of us probably had seen it online, probably on the social media space, that the malaria vaccine RX is already been distributed for use in certain countries. I am a bit very careful with my words. As much as this vaccine is distributed, but I'm asking myself, when this vaccine was tested, of course, you can't talk about malaria without looking at Africa. Obviously, that's the seat of it. So probably the trial took place in Africa. But now the benefits of the trial has come. And I'm wondering how many of the countries in Africa have this vaccine distributed. How many of the countries? Oh, you probably have all of it, but I'm sure a lot of countries were involved in that trial. So these are issues that, is beginning to come, that pertinent issues that are rising. The access, how many countries? At the end of the day, we involve, how do we get access to the proceeds of the interventions which we're part of? Follow-up obligations. You say, oh, trial is over, that's the end. Are there provisions for long-term follow-up in this trial? What are the data sharing requirements? Data sharing, this is very important. And I'm happy that many institutions, I think OAU has an intellectual property office now. I saw that online. So that's a very good one from the institution. And I think several other institutions are taking really keen interest in this. So we need to look at data sharing, very important, because data is everything. So you don't just do research, now this is coming up because we're going to have, like I said, a lot of multinational research. I don't just do research and then we just give out the data. What happens to the data at the end of the research? Who has access to the data? How is the data being protected? Is the data used for exactly what it said it would be used for? We have had a situation where across multinational and international collaborative research, where people collect data, and by the time they are transferring the data to their countries, it's used for something else outside what has been agreed in the protocol. Then that's a breach of data integrity, and that's an issue. And these are the current things that we are grappling with in contemporary times. Even with respect to translation of knowledge to the participants and community. Now, knowledge, both from the protocol. Remember we said in the current times, it's no longer we sit down and write protocols. The participants are all involved, right from the design. So they must understand. They must understand what the research is about. The same way at the point of consenting, they should understand what the research is about before they give consent. So it becomes an informed consent. The same way at the point of dissemination of the finding, it's not just a note, we have conducted study and we are going. You must disseminate the information in a way that the participants understand. So these are responsibilities across for the researcher. Then also have issues for genomic research. The challenges you see is cutting across various types of research. For genomic research, we announce issues, the challenges. Is it possible that the participants can be re-identified, even though they have been anonymized? These are challenges, these are issues that are rising. Exploitation and misuse of samples. Oh, you have collected certain things about, you know one thing about when you take, because genomics is about the genes, you can't get a lot of things from the gene. And it's also possible that there's a form of exploitation from the findings from that research. What is the implication? What can be the implication? Because when you talk about genomic, you're worried about the effects and implication on the people involved in the study. And it causes one particular research that causes group harm when not properly managed. There could be group harm. So everybody is tagged. There's a stereotyping. Oh, everybody from this particular gene, we found that this gene is associated with this and all of that. It can affect their employability. It can affect their social status, depending on the climate where it happens. Also, with respect to genomic research, we are going to look at issues about international data transfer restrictions, data sovereignty and governance. The data is generated from me. I should have a stake in what the data is used for. I should have a stake in how the data is used. I'm not just a collection center. These are the things we should begin to drive across our institutions and in the country. Of course, where you find incidental findings also in genomic research. Now, the ethical obligation comes. Should you return? Should you not return to tell the researchers what you have found? These are obligations that we owe our participants as researchers. We also have, how do you actually determine the validity of your findings clinically? How do you communicate challenges? How many people are well? Do we have enough trained persons who can conduct genetic counseling? These are issues. Now, for future unspecified research, like we have during biobanking, we're also looking at what is the best consent model. Yes, although most times we use broad consent, but is that the best model? What's the best consent model? So you see that consent model, unlike being rigid in traditional research, in current contemporary research, it's evolving. It's evolving. Issues are arising that even in biobank governance, that there must be community engagement, very important. So it's not just, it's no longer we just collect samples of participants and we put them in a particular location, in a particular storage and all that. We are going to say that we must engage the community. When it comes to benefit sharing, commercialization of the use and the proceeds of research, these are issues that are rising. It did not arise before now. But of course, because of the kind of complexity and the kind of research that is beginning to take place now, people are saying, no, we want to understand. We need to know, how will the benefit be shared? And these are things that we should discuss with those who are going to be involved in the study. Not just, like I said, from start to finish. The institutions, the participants, this must be very clear. And of course, for community-based research, like I said earlier, the issues, majorly you have issues around exploitation. So the participants may become subjects of exploitation. It's very common. We can also have some structural barrier. Remember that you're coming from the university, you're coming to conduct study in the community. Of course, there might be a lot of barriers across knowledge, and this must be broken. Decision-making, currently, we promote shared decision-making models. So it's not just about the researcher taking the decision for the community, but it must be shared. So both the researcher and the research participants, they have a major stake in the decision-making with respect to any form of research. This is the current reality in our time. Also, capacity building, very important. So when you go conduct a study in a community, please don't leave them the way you met them. There must be there should be something that the community should benefit from. And that they are benefiting from the research directly or indirectly. There are times where research obviously have been conducted in a particular study and a particular community. And at the end of the day, you have maybe probably Maybe you have construction of a school for them. You conduct research about a particular need, something that is missing in the community, and you conduct a research and you go. The ideal thing, ethical practice should be, you go back and see, how can I add to this community? So when we conduct research in community, the overall goal should be that we don't leave them worse than we met them. We should add something to that community. Also, another contemporary issue in our time, this was very real to us during COVID-19. Research during pandemics. How do we select? Now issues are, what's the criteria? How do you select those that will have access to the vaccine? The participants, you're going to do a trial with the vaccine in the case of an emergency situation. How? What's the criteria for selection? Now we are going to have emergency use authorizations. Yes, this particular drug has not passed through the entire state, but we have an emergency at hand. Do we keep our hands? We fold our hands until the particular vaccine or the particular drug goes through the entire process of a clinical trial before we can use. So issues about emergency use authorizations are coming in. Oh, if we have conducted a phase 1, we can actually test, let's use. Because we actually have an emergency. So these are all, before now, it's not been like that. We want to go through the entire phase of the trial before we actually get to, the use of that particular drug, or depending if it's a medical device and all of that. But now, in the case of pandemics, you don't go through that process anymore. In the case of pandemic, I'm going to talk about accelerated reviews. Yes, the review process goes through A, B, and C, but we have currently an emergency at hand. So we can't say, this is how we have been doing it. We must quickly change our process. But in the process, the most important is as we change the process, we are ensuring that the participants are not put at risk in any form. We're also looking at issues about data sharing during emergencies, public health emergencies. How do we share data? Because of course, data is very important because you need data to take decision, informed decision about probably the control of that. If it's a disease process, the control of the disease, you need to take decision about preventive measures to implement either at subnational level or the national level. So these are issues that are very important and have currently arisen in contemporary times. Now I go to capacity building. I decided to use this particular image because it depicts everything that capacity building talks about. It's about learning, it's about experience, it's about knowledge, it's about skills, it's about growth. It brings growth. It's about training, about competence. And we discover that it's important. It's becoming increasingly important that we build capacity in research ethics. And I'm happy for this platform that has been provided by the Manuscript Writing Hub to actually build the capacity. So I see Manuscript like this hub as also a vehicle to promote capacity building in research ethics. Why is it important? Because we are currently, there's an evolving landscape. The research landscape is evolving. It's changing. It's not the way we have been doing it before. It is changing. And as such, we need to build capacity to flow in the change. Like I said, there's one thing that is constant in life, and that is change. So with each of these evolving complexities in research, if we don't build our capacity, we will come to a point where the lack of knowledge will become detriment to us. The lack of knowledge will be what will result in our exploitation because we don't have knowledge. Of course, we know that knowledge is power. So with the current new methodologies that are beginning to arise with respect to AI, big data, genomics, we need knowledge. We need to build capacity. Also, global collaboration needs. You need to build capacity. You need to know the guidelines. You are conducting a multinational study across various countries. You need to, knowledge will help you to know what is obtainable. What is the guideline in the UK? What's the guideline in the US? And because you need to recognize all of this in the conduct of your research. We all know that when you have multinational research, when you're conducting multinational research, it's not just in the host country where that particular site. You also need ethical approval from one of the other institutions. You need to align your research. The research must be conducted in line with the guideline of the respective institutions, in line with the respective countries. So when you don't know, how do you align your research to that? It becomes a problem and you'll be found to be non-compliant. And that's why it's important that we build capacity. Why must we build capacity? in order to gain public and community trust. We understand that one of the issues, see why many times in our communities when we say we want to conduct research, we see that the community is hostile. Many times we want to conduct research, you see that sometimes you discover that the participants, people are not willing. People are not willing. I usually say it doesn't matter how much, when you want the amount you want to give research participants, which some people do. They think, or when you give them your money, our people are not, we're not fools. Where there is a breach of public trust, I tell you, you will not succeed in research. So in order to build that trust, one of the ways to build that is that we must get knowledge. We must build our capacity. Capacity in community engagement. Proper community engagement in research is missing in many of our research process. We just draft our protocols, we go to the community and collect data. No. When you conduct a good community engagement, I tell you that you experience success in your research. That's one of the pillars for success in research. Proper community engagement. But we lack that capacity. Many of our researchers lack that capacity, and we need to build that capacity. We lack capacity in research ethics to even know what makes a research ethical. Many of us, we state it as a point. It's like what you have coded in your head. You know, you have just memorized what makes a research ethical, this, that. No, but beyond the reeling, beyond the checklist is the applicability in our research. And that comes from the place of knowledge. So we must move from compliance to culture. It's not just the ethics committee said I should do this. Ethics committee have said I should do this, and that's why I'm doing it. We must move from compliance. It must become a culture that is seated deep in our institution, a culture that is seated deep in the fabrics of our own being. So research ethics becomes a culture, not just because they say I should do it. If I don't do it, I don't get this. No, it becomes a culture. Now, I quickly just looked at how the checklist to determine ethics capacity is at first is the structure. Is the structure. So if I want to determine the capacity of a particular individual, a particular institution, there are several things that we look out for, and that is the structure. How resourced, how trained are the members of the ethics committee? How effective is the ethics committee? What's the expertise? What expertise do you have on board? Now, you see that for many of the contemporary kind of research that we have now, if an ethics committee is not well trained, if we don't have adequate capacity, you can't review. How do you review an adaptive trial when you're still probably having an issue with reviewing the normal randomized control trial? It becomes an issue. So when an institution gets such protocol, where the expertise is not available, and for some institutions, they won't even set for expertise outside their institution, what happens? It becomes blanket, go ahead, approval. When you approve a study you have not properly reviewed, you put the participants at risk. Also, another thing we look, another checklist is your process. We look at the process. How efficient is the review process? How consistent? How rigorous is the review process? We have had a situation where people are shopping ethics committees. They leave an ethics committee to other ethics committee, probably where they don't have rigorous process. Some ethics committee, you probably go there and you send your work to such ethics committee. It is an expert approval. You have another ethics committee that will tell you that, no, we need to review your work. And by the time the comment is coming from the ethics committee, you have a whole lot. But I take time to tell researchers that every time you have a robust review of your work as a researcher, it makes the work beautiful and better. Aside protecting the participants, it even adds value to your research. And finally, another checklist is the culture. What's the ethics culture in such environments? Is there an environment that values ethics? Is there an environment that values the practice? Because it's one thing to do, it's another thing to value the practice and encourage such practice. Of course, we are beginning to have institutions where awards are given to ethically compliant researchers. I've had that. In short, I was following up an institution, one of the institutions I follow in the US. They actually have a day, Research Ethics Day. And on that day, they give awards to best performing researchers who have been very compliant across their research over the years. They are given awards. That's the kind of environment, the culture we talk about that promotes ethics. The challenges of our ethics committees, we cannot overemphasize. We've spoken a bit about them. Underfunding is an issue. Underfunding. And that's one of the underfunding also is what affects the review process. So they're underfunded. You have a lot of people lack interest, no motivation. We are relying on volunteers. Many of the members, we have a lot of membership not skilled in the current trends in research. You also have variations in the quality of review across committees. And that's one of the things that encourage ethics shopping. I go from one committee to another. If you have a standardized review process, so whether you go to committee A or committee B, you get the same response. There will be no need for shopping in ethics. And that's very wrong. So also there's a responsibility also that we need to move from compliance to actually getting to educate the community. So the ethics committees need to be seen as partners. We're not just barriers to you getting approval, but actually partners. I always say it, they are partners in the research process. And this committee also have a responsibility to train the researchers within their community. You need to train them. It's a responsibility. I see it as, I call it like a corporate social responsibility that the ethics committee owe their research community. There's a need to begin to integrate ethics training into our graduate programs. So right from undergraduate days, you start learning ethics, not just at the point of when you're doing your master's degree. We begin to teach ethics in our meeting, our seminar meetings in departments. We begin to teach ethics. There are a list of available resources. I think we shared this. We shared this already. But there's an addition. Prof brought it up, and thank you so much, ma, for bringing that up. It was an oversight. We have the tree. You know, as many of us are familiar with the CITI, but there's also the tree also. The national code actually recognizes the two of them, CITI and tree. Though across my institution, we use CITI, also tree is also accepted as well. So it's also a platform where it's a free program. You have free online training in research ethics. They have courses in research evaluation, courses in good clinical practice, and also our national code. So these are the two platforms that have national. So you have national code on tree, and you have national code on CITI. So the tree is TRREE. TRREE. I'm going to send it and put it on the platform. TRREE. So it's also another, aside the ones that I've listed here. Of course, many of us are familiar. We also, University of Leeds also run a course in Introduction to Research Ethics. WHO has a research ethics online training that is free, so you don't have to pay for it. The ASORI also, Office of Research Integrity, you have a free online course also in responsible conduct of research. It's free of charge, you don't pay for it. Skylink has a workshop, it's annually, but though the advert for this year has not come out, it's usually a paid workshop also in also research ethics. EDCTP also conducts, they have a research ethics courses for those, the grant funds from EDCTP. Of course, the Springer Nature Journal also has a course on research ethics for editors. It's free also. Also, you can also access that. So we come to, I'm rounding up my presentation, is how do we build a culture, an institutional ethics culture? First is that it starts from the leadership. We must have leadership commitment. Leadership commitment to building an ethics culture. So the leadership of every institution should champion ethics, should champion it from the communications to policies. So they must have good allocation to the ethics. As part of their annual agenda, their annual budget, what is the allocation to ethics? It shows your interest in ethics. So we must begin to have leadership commitment. We need to reward ethical practice that I said earlier. We should have policies. Now you discover now we're having a lot of contemporary issues in research. We're having AI based research, but I'm beginning to ask how many of our institutions have policies of how to handle AI research? Even to collecting data, online collection of data, how many institutions have a policy with respect to that? Of course, that has taken over the routine paper-based data collection. But how many of our institutions have SOP? How many of us have policies in place? So that's where the leadership commitments come into play. I've talked about the policies also. We also have supportive environments. There's a kind of environment that allows, that promotes ethics. An environment where you have reporting channels. So you have whistleblowers. So when you notice anything, you have a place you can go to where your information, you share what you find, and it's not used against you. So that's the kind of environment that supports a culture of ethics. And where those that also err, they have punitive measures in place. Where there are no punitive measures, that means you're promoting unethical practice. And this has to stop across our institutions. Also, we need to integrate ethics from start to finish. And when we talk about start, from the grant proposal through to publication to the archiving of the data, you must incorporate ethics all through. It's like a checkpoint along the road. So there must be ethics at every checkpoint through the research process. There should be public engagement. All the stakeholders that are involved is very important. Stakeholder engagement is very, very important. And that's one of the ways of building public trust. When you involve all the stakeholders in your research process, you build public trust in the long run. You must build capacity I talked about that earlier, build capacity and identify the specifics with respect to each country, with each institution. Especially now that we begin to have a lot of international collaborative research. In terms of protocol development, I've discovered that many of the protocols that come in terms of international collaborative research, because I'm involved in some, you saw that some of the protocols are, everything is written from those colleagues in the north, and it is thrown down to the south for implementation. No, it shouldn't be such a way. It shouldn't be that. You must be part of the protocol development from the beginning. Why is it important? You can bring in the specifics with respect to where you are coming from. You don't expect somebody in the US to begin to think about what obtains. You know the specifics of what obtains in your setting. And that is communicated in the protocol. The necessary stakeholders are involved in the drafting of that protocol. It's not the kind of you throw down protocol developed from the north, thrown down to the south. No. That does not encourage a culture of ethics. And of course, the high-income institutions and countries, they also have an obligation to support the ethics infrastructure. I remember across our institution where I work, when we started, we didn't just start to become what we are right now in ethics, but one of the researchers took a lead, and that was very commendable. Oh, we got to a particular point. The ethics here is not strengthened. Started by training. So a lot of people were sent for training in research ethics across various departments. They came back, they started replicating the same thing in their, you see, that's an environment that promotes ethics. So where you have funding, designed for international collaborative research, it's not the funding. Let's stop, you get probably your stipends every month as an investigator, and that's all. Let's begin to insist on capacity building for our institution, beyond collecting money. Let's insist on capacity building, because that's one thing I think nobody can take from you. Capacity building in ethics. If you have an institution and the ethics committee is not strong enough, as it were, as you're getting your grant and all that, please include as part of the requirements also capacity building for the ethics committee. But I noticed that many researchers also get comfortable when they have an ethics committee that is not, not very efficient, because they feel that everything can go through with such ethics committee. In the long run, we are not helping the system. In the long run, we are not helping to promote a culture of ethics. We must invest in capacity. I'm rounding up. And just to end up as I go is that we must embrace change. That's just a fact. We must learn from experiences and grow stronger. We must focus on the future and seize new opportunity. Just as the changes are taking place in research currently, we must embrace this change, and we must seize it and see it as an opportunity for us. These are my references. Thank you so much for listening.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for that insight into contemporary issues in ethics. First, let me apologize to those joining from YouTube. We're not able to join early. We're not able to live stream early, and when we did, we couldn't display pictures, so they couldn't see the slide of the presenter. Is due to some logistic challenge with live streaming that we did not foresee. But we'll definitely upload the recording of the session on the YouTube so that everyone can get a glimpse of what was presented. With that, our time is fast spent, but we started it quite late, so I would plead your indulgence to stay 3 to 4 minutes extra. So, Dr. Gwetere, we have many questions to answer within a short period of time, so I'll just speak as many as we can take. Okay, I'll start with the first one here. Is there any research that can satisfy all these ethical requirements 90%?
I'll tell you no. But to an extent, there must be the intention for you as a researcher to see that your research aligns with those requirements. That's the much I will be able to say. Yes.
Okay,
Not
thank you
completely,
for that
yes, for
concise
certain, yes. But
response.
you must, it's the intention of the researcher. That's what is very important. You have that intention to see that your research aligns. But while you are making that intention along the way, you discover a few, are not and all that. Forgive yourself and move ahead. Yeah.
Yes, so someone wants to know how to get participants involved in protocol preparation.
Okay.
I know
Yeah.
that's an area of risk that was yeah, okay.
Yes. So how do you get participants involved? Remember that before you draft your protocol and all of that, you probably do a feasibility assessment for your research. So that is the point where you get the participants involved. It's not like it's not like calling them to a meeting, they all sit down at the round table. So I'm going to conduct a study across a group of participants. So members of that group, I can engage them in a discussion. That's part of getting them involved. But what do you see about this? What are the current issues that you're having? From the inside from them, you discover that it's going to help your protocol development. You probably get a new insight to what you were thinking because you were thinking it within your own lens as a researcher. By the time you're getting the input from this research, those who are your prospective participants, it adds a lot of insight into your research work and you're able to bring in specific content that relates to them in the design of your protocol. So it's not necessarily that you are calling them for a meeting in Abuja to sit down together and draft the protocol with you. So that's the way you get them involved.
All right. I'll take two questions together. The two of them are talking about how do you impact the community where you've done research, given financial limitations. Somebody gave an hypothetical situation in which 3 communities were used for a research, but in terms of capacity building or giving back to the society was done in a single community because of financial constraints. So they want you to speak to giving back to the community where studies are carried out.
All right, thank you very much. This is something I'm very passionate about. Maybe because I'm a community medicine physician, I don't know. But I say that, like I said, and I say it again, you must not leave the community worse than how you met them. Depending on if you don't have a grant for your study, there's very little you can do. But if you have a grant, right from the drafting, the proposal of the grant, you incorporate this into the grant proposal. So if you are able, within what is available within the finance, the budget for your grant, for your study, what you get can only suffice for one community, that's fine. It's better than not doing. But the most important is having it in mind that I want to give back to this community. Sometimes the giving back to the community may not be necessarily monetary. It could be giving knowledge. I conducted a study and I found out that there is paucity of knowledge. The knowledge score very poor in this area. I don't just go and publish my work and sit down there and that's the end. I might find a way to go back to that community to get them to know. That's also giving back to the community. I hope I answered your question.
Absolutely, ma. Someone wants to know about data sharing and who owns the data, given that research is carried out among different nation and culture.
Okay. So now there's something that, Nigeria has currently so helped us. It has become so easy with discussing issues about data sharing. Why? So I want to refer you, I will put that up on the blog. The General Data Protection Regulation for Nigeria, 2023, GDPR 2023. General Data Protection Regulation is currently, that's what, for all those of us who are involved in international collaborative research, we'll refer you to our guideline. We refer you to that policy. Oh, this is what Nigeria says. This is what Nigeria, and you have very beautiful measures in place in that document to actually get to protect data. So we are no longer just saying it like what should be. We now have a policy that actually strengthens that for us in Nigeria. So I refer you to the General Data Protection Regulation 2023 for Nigeria.
Thank you very much, man. There are requests to share the links to those capacity building.
Okay. Yes, I will. I will do a detailed list. I will just share it on the blog for each of them. I've done quite a number of those courses before now, so and maybe additional ones. There were additional I didn't list here, so I also used the opportunity to share that with you on the WhatsApp blog.
For that, there's a long one here that I've not gotten a grasp of. Okay, let me read that and take it as the last question. I have a research to conduct and I use minimum number of laboratory animals for each group. At the point of the university ethical committee, the committee asks that a group must be removed to help animal rights. Removing a group will change the whole idea or goal of the research. What does this researcher do at this point? Most researchers just comply with their review just to get ethical clearance. This can be frustrating at times for review when reviewer is not the same field as the researcher. No amount of explanation can change them. I'm sure a couple of people can relate to this as well.
So I want to say that where the researcher is not in the same field with that should never be an issue for an ethics committee, because the ethics committee is a diverse group of experts. So you have experts across various fields. And it is also the ethics committee has the responsibility where you don't have the expertise on your team. You can seek external, it is allowed. You can seek for external review for that area. Even the national body does that. They don't have all the expertise on the National Ethics Committee. Sometimes they send reviews to some people across institutions where they know these people are experts in this area. Now, back to your question. Where the Ethics Committee says you have to remove the group, and you think it's important for you to answer your research question, then you need to actually seek for engagement with the Ethics Committee. Engagement not in paper or not in mail. Engagement physical. Because sometimes it works. I've had that. Many researchers have done that. By the time you're engaging me physical, probably it can even be over a video conferencing or maybe through Zoom, but I'm talking to you and be able to explain exactly, sometimes the writings as I speak, it might not be able to explain everything that you mean. But however, as much as possible, your protocol without seeing you should be clear enough. But sometimes we see that not the case in some research. So you might want to seek for engagement with the ethics committee, physical or virtually, through any of the virtual links and means, to actually talk about your research. That might change it. And if after that, the position of the ethics committee still remains the same, then it's probably need that you might need to remove that group. Because I think if you've adequately explained and all of this, there are sometimes you actually get the explanation done and everything changes. They say, we didn't get to this part of the work. It can stay. So that's what I would advise, that you engage the ethics committee properly.
Yes. And I think I can relate to that. My research group have had calls to visit the ethics committee to give explanation of what our trial is all about and all of that. And it was very helpful for both teams.
Exactly.
So I think with that question, we can round up the session, the 4 weeks training program for this year. And I'm sure it has been an enlightening and fruitful one for everyone, including myself. We have had 4 weeks where we moved from what ethics is all about to today, when we discuss contemporary issues in ethics. And let's note that this is not the end of learning ethics. And I'm happy that many of the participants are interested in getting more lectures or training in ethics. Just last week, I bought a book on the basis of bioethics, trying to get more knowledge about ethics. So it is a whole field of its own, and there are different areas to learn and keep engaging with to improve oneself. For those who are registered for this course, who have met the criteria for certification, one of the things we also do is that beyond the training that we're given in this course, you'll also be required to do some ethics course online that you complete before you are certified, being trained by us. So the instructions on how to get certificate and all of that will be passed on the WhatsApp page. And for our YouTube participants, again, I apologize for the challenge we had today. I do not think there was any question. On the YouTube. Just let me check again. No, there was none. So thanks for participating and joining us for the course of the 4 weeks program. Our next training program is going to start 7th of February. For those who have registered for the course, a link has been shared to your email to join the WhatsApp group, which will be closed shortly. So once it's closed, you can only join through the YouTube channel. Thanks for everyone for joining our training program. And apologies for taking extra time this morning. It was due to the challenge we had. Let's have a beautiful weekend and see you 7th of February when we start the training on quantitative data analysis. It promises to be a very interesting and engaging one. Thank you, everyone, and bye.
Yeah, thank you.